Sometimes, dreams can mean so much more. It seems they can be unreal and far removed from reality. Because of this, many people don't give them any importance. But when they come true, the line between reality and dreams disappears. There's a risk of getting lost between two worlds and losing yourself forever. After all, that shadow will always haunt you. A mysterious secret may remain unsolved, and the events that unfold in life will only remind you of it. It can kill a person, leave them in solitude. You can go insane, hate the whole world. It brings fear. Sometimes you just want to find the lost meaning and return to reality. But when it becomes clear that it's almost impossible to do, you want to throw your hands up in front of your own fear. You can fall into a trap from which you'll have to escape your whole life. It seems this could be the end. The main character didn't pay much attention to his dreams from the very beginning. He suffered for a long time from various nightmares, where he saw different monsters and creatures, since childhood. But he remembered one, a spirit that he saw constantly. It always stood in front of him. He could even feel its gaze and the cold. It seemed the ghost was trying to convey some kind of message. His whole life, he dreamed of that mysterious spirit. He didn't notice, but he realized that the ghost was always haunting him. And even when the dreams were different, the ghost continued to watch him. And this raised a lot of questions because every time he woke up from the ghost's cold stare, he didn't even realize how the images from his dreams met him in real life. His parents were ordinary people living a mundane life just like any other family. They weren't special or wealthy. People had breakfast together, worked, and just lived. They enjoyed life and cherished each day. His parents loved their son, but in a special way. The boy named Ze wasn't like other kids. He hardly spoke and thought a lot. He even forgot about his own birthday. This was due to the nightmares that wouldn't let him rest, because the dream was very strange. At first, his parents didn't take his words seriously, but they agreed to listen to him. Ze told them about an abandoned settlement he saw in his dream, and about the ghost that constantly haunted him and didn't move. But when his parents heard about the settlement he dreamed of, they just exchanged glances. They couldn't believe it, and they blamed the boy for not telling them about it earlier. Then Ze realized that his parents knew something and didn't want to tell him, because he saw fear on their faces. And even after he told them everything, they didn't stop being anxious. The hero saw that they were hiding something from him. His relatives just wanted to calm him down, and assured him that it was just a regular dream, just like all the others. Moreover, they tried to explain the reason for his nightmares. But they had already decided for themselves. His parents planned to take him to a psychologist. Upon learning this, Ze refused. His parents didn't want to revisit the topic anymore. Instead, they started planning their son's birthday. Their reaction was puzzling. It seemed there was really something abnormal in his dreams, but he couldn't explain it. The next morning, a knock at the door. But he hadn't invited anyone and wasn't expecting anyone. When he opened the door, he saw a package left behind. It was a gift from an unknown person. Ze thought his parents might have ordered something, but they didn't respond. The boy decided to check where they were and why they weren't answering him. And when he opened the door, he saw his parents crying and talking about some coincidence. They were scared because of his dreams, as the settlement he described was a terrible omen. And then the hero understood everything. His nightmares weren't ordinary. Still, he decided to take a look at the gift that had been sent to him. Opening the box, he found puzzles. The picture wasn't big, but the pieces were all the same color and very hard to distinguish. However, he started putting them together, because on the other side were numbers so he could tell them apart. But suddenly he stopped. Fear gripped him as the hero saw the same ghost from his nightmares. That place was already familiar to him. When suddenly, that place was right in front of him. Then he saw the ghost again and for the first time tried to speak to it. Ze tried to shout at it and find out who it really was and why it had been haunting him. But the shadow just smiled. Suddenly, a loud noise. He heard strange voices in his head and couldn't understand what was happening. Everything around him felt very strange. The plants weren't ordinary, they had become predators that could swallow him whole. Everything in that world turned threatening. Even the birds, which had posed no threat before, transformed into monsters. Everything in that world was against him, and at any moment he could die. What kind of place was this? What did the ghost want to do, and why had it followed him for so many years? When suddenly corpses. They were everywhere. The bodies of those people were mangled, they were skinless. What could all this mean? when suddenly the ghost, for the first time in all this time, came very close to the main character. It held clay dolls that were his parents. But the worst was yet to come, because, smiling, the ghost destroyed them. It was again a nightmare from which Ze woke up. It was the scariest dream of his life, and for the first time he saw the death of his own parents. At that moment he panicked intensely, and tried to find his dad and mom to make sure they were safe. The boy, in despair, tried to shout for them, when suddenly he heard his mother's voice. She let him in, but the ground was covered in an incomprehensible liquid. It was the same liquid he had seen in the dream, and then he realized what had really happened. The scene was horrifying. His worst nightmare had come true. But this was all really happening. Those were his parents who would never speak to him again. They were dead, a terrible death. When suddenly he remembered that he had once dreamed of a funeral. He had buried his own parents. What other misfortunes awaited him ahead? Still, he understood that he needed to do something. He hoped it wasn't true. But everything was really happening. He had lost the closest people to him forever and was left alone. After a while, the news reported the circumstances of the horrific tragedy. It turned out that many other people who had once been good friends were also victims. The main character couldn't bear to listen to this. So the strange voices in his head didn't stop for a moment. The police had already begun investigating the details of the tragedy and wanted to find any evidence. His parents' bodies were also sent for examination to determine what could have really happened. And the boy gathered all the money he had to arrange their funeral. It was one of the worst days of his life. Ze felt nothing anymore, he simply resigned himself to the loss. Others tried to support him, but he held on. People also began talking about a curse due to the other murdered individuals. When suddenly women started talking about the village they had gone to, then the hero understood what they were talking about. Because it was the same place that had haunted his dreams all along and had terrified his parents so much. He tried to find out more information about that place. But they refused to continue talking because they wanted to keep it a secret. Friends tried to comfort him. Ze realized he had been very rude and listened to their advice. One last time he wanted to be with his parents, because soon their bodies were to be prepared for cremation. He stared at their shared coffin for a long time, when suddenly, the lid opened. Behind him, the boy felt a strange cold. He hoped he was just imagining it, that someone was behind him. But he understood it was the same ghost he had constantly seen in his nightmares. The evil ghost tried to push him into the coffin. Then, Ze understood what was really happening. It was clear that the phantom wanted only one thing, his death. And then he saw his parents lying there. They looked as if they had just fallen asleep and he only had to wake them up. But his mother was smiling. Suddenly he saw some strange plants. They began to sprout from her eyes, ears, and nose. After a while there were so many of them, but they didn't stop, they just kept growing. The most horrifying part was that they could speak to the main character, and they begged him to return to them. They wanted him to lie next to his own parents. Strange voices filled his head, and they wouldn't let him rest. He was surrounded by ghosts he had seen in nightmares for years. He couldn't tell if any of this was real. Suddenly Ze started to run. He didn't want to die. He pushed past people who had also come to the funeral. His behavior was incomprehensible to most of them, and it raised a lot of questions. To calm himself down, Ze locked himself in the bathroom. He tried to understand what all of this could mean. Was he losing his mind? Were his parents right, and did he really need a therapist? Then he heard the strange voice again. It was the ghost that had found him once more. He saw it reflected behind him in the mirror. He immediately felt sick. Moreover, he saw blood on his own body. As it turned out, he was injured and had a deep cut behind his ear. He couldn't understand when it had happened, as he hadn't felt anything at all. But what happened next was simply unbelievable. Gradually, his face began to disintegrate. Ze was losing his skin and looked like a corpse. But it wasn't just his face that was changing. His right hand began to transform too. Claws grew, and his skin was covered in scales. It was incredibly painful. But he stopped feeling fear as he noticed that after his parents' death, he had become much calmer. Instead, he felt only a desire for revenge and wanted to try to kill the ghost to rid himself of it. He decided he would find it and kill it at any cost to avenge his parents. Suddenly, he heard the voices of his friends who had managed to find him. They were worried about him as they could see something was wrong. More than anything, He feared they would come into the bathroom and see everything for themselves. Just then, the mirror shattered into tiny pieces. He couldn't explain what had really happened, but his friends' voices grew louder. They were trying to force the door open, desperate to get inside. Suddenly, they succeeded. The lock had been broken, and the door was about to swing open. When the door opened, the main character tried to hide his mangled body. The man who entered froze in place, terrified. If he saw the main character like this, it would all be over. But in the shattered mirror, he saw that he had managed to return to his normal body. After a while, he began searching for information about that settlement, realizing there was some hidden connection between all the events. He couldn't forget the women's words and was determined to uncover the truth at any cost. Suddenly, he spotted an old magazine belonging to his father. Inside was a photo of his friends by that very tree. He also found the name of that settlement, a village called Stone. But he kept searching. Among his father's archives, he tried to find suspicious evidence of the existence of that place. The photographs were all too familiar. He had seen them in his dreams for many years, and it terrified him. But he understood that if the spirit truly wanted his life, he would have been dead long ago. So he was determined to start searching. Moreover, he knew that all the people in the photo were also dead, as they had been his father's friends. Their names were familiar to him too. But when he tried to stand up, he found one more very interesting thing. It was his father's notebook. It was clear that the information in the book was something the man had tried to hide, as the title of the diary spoke for itself. It contained research on the very village of Stone. And he realized this was definitely not a coincidence. Reading the book, he understood that everything had happened 17 years ago. The journal began with the arrival of people in the settlement. The village had long been abandoned, and no one lived there. People had come to the settlement to find a massive meteorite that had landed there. But despite the meteorite's destructive power, the houses in the village remained intact, and there were no signs of its landing. Even after several days of searching, they found nothing. Because the settlement was so quiet, people began to panic. But then, the writing abruptly stopped, indicating they had encountered someone in the settlement. Moreover, Ze couldn't understand why his father had kept the album from him for so long and hadn't just destroyed it. Additionally, the names in the photograph were written in order. He was very scared to read further. But despite that, he continued. He soon realized that the problems were very serious as people began to lose their minds one by one. After a while, he noticed that one of his friends was acting very strangely. He was not himself. Ze was drawn to one odd guy. Could he now become a ghost and haunt him? But when they managed to wake Han Qing and he came to his senses, they noticed he was not the same as before. His father knew that everyone secretly burned red ribbons found on trees, but he couldn't understand why they did it. But he had no choice and did the same. The investigation continued for a while longer, after which they decided to return. Then people realized that this was just the beginning. The journal captivated the main character so much that he couldn't tear himself away and forgot how to breathe. The description of the settlement completely matched what he saw in his dreams. Suddenly, on one of the pages, he saw mysterious numbers. What was interesting was that they were handwritten. So, to start, he decided to check it out. There was a very simple way to do this. He went online and began searching for all the names and numbers mentioned in the journal. Immediately, he found information about a strange old man, and what he read there terrified him, because he realized that all the words in the journal were true. Then he found information about the deaths of all the people who had participated in the expedition that day. The circumstances of their deaths were so horrific that he shuddered as he read the information. It didn't seem like suicide, because the deaths were brutal and bloody. The main character couldn't understand what it all could mean or how the lives of these people could be connected. These horrifying thoughts wouldn't let him rest. He tried not to think about it, but he realized he hadn't found anything about the death of one more person, and he was determined to find him before he was also killed. The next day, he began his search and met with a friend who could help him. He met the son of that same dead man who had participated in the expedition with his father and was also dead. Moreover, information about the scientists was known to everyone. As it turned out, the lead scientist had survived and ended up in a mental hospital over 10 years ago. This was the key to the mystery. The main character felt a glimmer of hope, and he found him. The patient felt stable, but the doctors warned the main character that he could use the button if anything happened. He told the man about the death of his parents. They still hadn't managed to escape their fate. Moreover, he had a few questions he wanted to ask. But the man managed to warn him before he could ask, because this case he was trying to solve would never end for him. After all, he couldn't stop the curse that had existed for millennia. Still, the man decided to help him. After all, this was the son of his friend who had tragically died. His words that the main character was a gift from evil forces shocked Ze. As it turned out, the group of researchers had been in stone for over a month. And this differed from what his father had written, because you couldn't trust anyone who had been in that settlement. There were only 5 records of the investigation in the village, one of which was handled by his father. The information in all of them was different. He personally remembered that they had left in December and stayed there for 35 days. Ze became curious and tried to ask him for his own diary. He just wanted to compare how much the information differed from what he had already read. Moreover, everyone believed in the existence of a god in the village who appeared during the experiments. The people who were in the village at that time made a wish. His parents had done the same as before Ze. They had 2 other children who had died. And then they wished for him to be born. His mother had completely trusted that god, as she believed it was thanks to him that she was able to conceive. She loved the main character very much, and hoped that he and his father would survive. At those words, Ze couldn't hold back and burst into tears. He was ready to do anything to go to stone and figure everything out. But he shouldn't have rushed, because the ghosts, they could tell everything and show him. When the hero left the hospital, a terrible downpour began outside. He was completely soaked. But the man gave him his own notes and he planned to study them in detail. Suddenly, he noticed a dead cat in the middle of the street. Moreover, drops of blood were falling from the sky. His hands and clothes were covered in blood. Just then, he heard a familiar voice. It was the same man who, calling out to God, had asked for death. He finally wanted to be free and was about to end his life. In a panic, people began to call the police while the main character tried to shout to him, trying to stop him. But it was too late. He jumped and fell to his death. His mangled body and a pool of blood lay in the middle of the street. And the rain continued to pour from the sky. However, there was no more blood. At that moment, he noticed that the cat, which had been dead before, had come back to life. It could be the uncle who gained freedom and after death inhabited his body. After a while, he managed to catch it, but it looked like an ordinary cat. He couldn't understand anything. He returned to his own home, but he was soaked and felt cold. In front of him lay the puzzle pieces he never managed to finish. He recalled the man's words about the numbers that started appearing in his dreams. And then it all clicked for him. Because the puzzles that had been sent to him contained numbers. Could this really be what he was searching for? The hero tried to match the puzzle pieces with the numbers from the magazines. He began to assemble them. And after a while, he realized he could see a clear picture before him. It seemed to him that everything changed with the wish that people had made. And this was the beginning of a series of horrific deaths that began to occur among them. After all, their lives could be the price to pay. The next day, he planned to take an academic leave to have more time for his search. He had decided to find the village and wanted to go there. Besides, Sheng asked how he was feeling. After all, he had witnessed what happened at the funeral and saw how the main character shattered the glass. Ze tried to convince him that he was fine. That day was his birthday, and he wasn't planning on dying until he figured everything out. Sheng believed him and allowed him to go so he could rest. However, he couldn't fully understand him. But more than anything, he wanted Ze to be okay and have a good time to relax. So, he gave him leave and allowed him to skip classes. Then, the main character began to make wishes as he did on every birthday. But this time, he wanted to find the one responsible for all the crimes. Suddenly, his voice trembled. He cried, because he understood that he would never see his parents again and hoped that after death they could finally find peace and wait for his return. The next day, he set off on his journey. He was headed to the very place marked on his father's map. When he arrived, it was already dark, but he wasn't going to stop and continued searching. And when he saw the place, an inexplicable pain surged in his heart. He had no idea what awaited him ahead. He approached a local resident. He hoped that the man might know how to find Stone Village, because the road marked on the map was actually blocked. So he needed to find another way. But the man didn't respond and shooed him away. He didn't want to talk about the place with spirits. Ze also noticed the man's hand, because the man was missing a few fingers. He continued to ask other people, but as soon as he started talking about the settlement, everyone fell silent and didn't respond. After a while, He didn't even notice how it had gotten completely dark outside. So he needed to find a place to spend the night. And on his way, he came across a local motel. However, his attention was drawn to a mysterious man sitting by the entrance. He looked terrible and didn't even react to him. Still, he went inside. To stay, he needed identification. The clerk assured him not to worry about the homeless man sitting by the entrance, because sooner or later he would die. But the boy wasn't listening anymore, because he saw a mysterious object described in his father's journal. It was a figurine used for the spirits. Could this be real? And was that mysterious man at the entrance involved? He chose a vacant room on the first floor for himself. He also asked about the ritual tablets that were everywhere. The man visibly got nervous and didn't answer his question. And when the boy asked again, the man got angry and told him not to leave his room at night unless there was a special reason, because outside he might encounter a spirit. That place made the main character feel fear. After his parents' death, he hadn't had nightmares, but suddenly, they returned. He found himself in an incomprehensible place. Through the thick fog, he didn't know where to go and couldn't find an exit. Suddenly, he met an unknown person who was also wandering and trying to find a way out. Suddenly, he realized he had the body of that sick scientist who had taken his own life. The unknown woman led him with her. He was to meet God. She also forbade him from speaking and forced him to just follow her. Something fell from her pocket, and he, seeing it, couldn't believe what was happening, because those were personal belongings of his dead friends. Suddenly, he stopped, because he couldn't move. His legs were in blood, and he stood in a pool of blood. Suddenly, an unknown voice shouted at him to wake up. It was a young girl with a pleasant appearance. And he woke up. Could this dream be what his uncle saw after death? Maybe it was that part of his life he couldn't remember? Maybe the uncle could return again, but now in a new body. Suddenly, the same man peeked through his window. His appearance scared Ze so much. What did he want from him? The man only called the boy a messenger of God. He made a wish and wanted someone to die. It was because of his face, which had become ugly again and was covered in scales. The unknown had never seen anything like it before, even though he himself had been ugly since birth. Moreover, he wanted to take revenge on the main character. But as soon as he saw the knife in his hands, he understood everything. Ze was about to go outside to talk to him and ask a few questions. He was in a huge rush. Suddenly, a little girl who lived in the motel tried to stop him. Because of the ghosts outside, suddenly, her mother appeared. She covered the girl's mouth. She was afraid the girl might get hurt for talking about ghosts. But the boy promised to return to the room soon. And then he stepped outside. He looked around and tried to be quiet. However, when he found no one, he returned to the motel. On the shelf next to the prayer figurine, he saw a box. Inside was a toy. The locals had gone mad worshipping the spirits. And when he entered his room, he saw that the door was open. Someone was there. Inside was the same clerk. But what was he doing in his room? However, he knew that the main character had gone outside. After all, there was a pool of blood in his room. Moreover, a severed hand appeared in his room. He had a knife in his hands, but he tried to explain everything and denied his guilt. But it was hard to believe him. Still, he let him go and was going to bring a new blanket. They were supposed to have a serious talk the next day. He also noticed that the boy wasn't scared at all. And he realized that when he saw the severed hand, he didn't feel fear at all. The next day, he went outside early. Suddenly, he saw the clerk sitting next to the same man. He was missing a hand, but he was alive. However, it was a sacrifice. And the homeless man wished for the clerk to die, and for that, he sacrificed his own hand. And when the main character saw the man trying to strangle him, he got really scared. Why was the clerk doing this? His appearance and the fact that he wanted to protect the poor man angered the clerk. But the boy didn't back down even when he was threatened. Still, the clerk gave in and retreated. The boy should have listened to his advice. The hero approached the homeless man. He tried to figure out why the homeless man wished for him upon seeing him and what his words about being God's messenger meant. The man only repeated that he couldn't kill him. He couldn't. He lost his own hand and upon seeing the boy, pulled out a knife. Because he recognized him and blamed him for what had happened. It was because of him that he lost his own hand, while the clerk was alive. Calling him God, he swung and aimed to strike. Out of fear, Ze shielded himself. Suddenly, drops of blood appeared on his body. It became clear that the madman was about to deprive himself of some part of his body, as one hand wasn't enough. Ze tried to calm him down and attempted to take the knife away. But it was too late, because the man wasn't listening and continued to cut himself. Returning to the motel, he asked the clerk to call the police as someone was dying outside. But upon hearing him, the man just laughed. The thing was, no one could help him, because there was no police in their town. Moreover, the clerk didn't think the homeless man was worth helping. He didn't consider him a human at all. But could the madman have killed himself as sacrificing his own hand wasn't enough? Suddenly, the clerk also pulled out a knife. He left the store. What was he planning to do? Suddenly, he went into the room with the little girl and her mother. It became clear that he had cut off a woman's leg and now wanted to take her child away from her. He remembered himself as a child when he and his friend talked about a dream he had. After all, it was a terrible dream. He dreamed of his own father and mother. They had something around their necks as if an evil spirit was holding them. Meanwhile, the woman was desperately trying to save her child. Why should an innocent child pay for his sins? But the man wasn't listening to her. The girl tried to stop him and begged the protagonist to save her. What was about to happen? And why was the man behaving so horrifically towards the child? But when he saw the man preparing to cut off the girl's arm, everything clicked. He lunged at him, trying to save her. And the people witnessing their fight didn't even think about helping him. They just walked by ignoring them. He couldn't understand why no one was reacting. However, the seller was already resisting less. Ze kept trying to shout for help, but no one approached. He was left alone with his own misery. Suddenly, he realized he had seen all those people before. He remembered his dream where they were all dead too. Suddenly, his hand began to transform again. The girl, noticing this, asked what had happened to his face. But there was no time to explain. He picked her up and planned to hide her in a hotel. He shut the front door. After all, the man he had just choked, along with others, was trying to get to him. He returned the girl to her mother, apologizing for his face, which might scare them. But the woman just thanked him. Besides, the girl wasn't scared of him at all. On the contrary, she liked his very beautiful eyes. This managed to lift the protagonist's spirits a little. The woman wanted the boy to leave this place as soon as possible. It was rotten. All the people living here were bound to die sooner or later. But what had really happened? It was a very long story, but she agreed to tell it. It all started a few years ago when almost the entire population went insane. They believed in a God capable of miracles. The main thing was to pay the right price for it. For that, they had to give up their own body parts. The woman also said that this way the sick had cut off her leg, and they planned to do the same to her girl. Now, the man was trying to cut the girl because he had been cursed. After all, another had given his own life for his death, and the seller was trying to protect himself. As it turned out, there was another way to break the curse. You had to kill the one who cursed you, and that's what he was trying to do on the street. The woman understood what he was trying to do, but she didn't think he had the courage to go through with it. But he was ready to do it. After all, he had lost his dearest people. At that moment, he broke down in tears, as he could no longer bear the pain inside his soul. He told her about the settlement of stone that he was trying to find. The woman had heard about that settlement before, but she knew it had disappeared hundreds of years ago. And no one knew where it actually was, as many were eager to find the village. She told him about a group of people who had managed to do it a few years ago. After those words, the protagonist left. He was ready to search for the way to the settlement, even if it meant killing someone. From the very beginning, he had strange premonitions. But now, finally, it had passed, and he felt much better. He understood that the worst awaited him outside, and he wasn't ready to leave the safe house. What did the black thread tied around the necks of all the people mean? And could their wishes really come true all at once? But that didn't matter, because he had a goal: to find the way to the settlement at any cost. Suddenly he stopped. In the sky, he saw a giant specter. It was the same ghost that had haunted him for many years. Moreover, it could control people. For that, it tied them to itself with a black thread. It was also capable of killing. Then the boy understood what it all could mean. He suspected that this ghost might be the god that the entire population worshipped. And then he saw a brief vision of an unclear figure. It seemed to be the ghost itself in the body of another person. Was this ghost really responsible for all the suffering of the people? Was it really because of it that his parents were dead? However, there was no time to hesitate, as all the people began to attack him. The black threads around their necks also meant that each of them had sacrificed something. He needed to come up with a way to escape and get out of that hell alive. He fought and tried to save himself. But he had no chance against a larger number of enemies. All his efforts were in vain. After all, he didn't want to hurt innocent people. Suddenly, he tried to cut the thread that connected a person to the ghost. He succeeded. Immediately, the person lost their balance and fell to the ground. He realized it worked. And that was the only way he had a chance to win and stay alive. Then, he continued doing the same with other people, cutting their threads one by one. He noticed that almost all the people were lying on the ground and not moving. He understood that the ghost was actually in the village, and the closer he got to it, the stronger it became. The hero cut the thread of the last one. He managed to survive the attack. He understood that the ghost could control people. It had poisoned their faith to make them dependent on it. Was it all to meet the protagonist? Suddenly, the ghost showed him the way. It was the road to the village of stone. After that, it simply vanished. Everything ended and the people began to wake up one by one. They remembered nothing. And the protagonist fell to the ground. People started calling him a monster when they saw his hand and face. But he didn't react because he had no strength left. After a while, he woke up. However, he couldn't understand where he was. He lay in his own room and thought it might have been a dream. But when he tried to get out, he noticed that the door to the room was locked. He heard voices outside and realized they were holding him in the room against his will. He also understood that people considered him a monster and just wanted to kill him. Moreover, they had a special plan for him. After all, people like the protagonist were worth a lot of money. And then he realized that the events that had taken place and how he fought the ghost were real. He began to panic and tried to shout for help. After all, he was their savior. Why had they done this to him? But they didn't want to let him go. People ignored the fact that he had truly been their savior and had freed them from the ghost. After all, 2 people were still dead and the hero wanted to call the police. By evening, they planned to sell the boy and kill him, but for now, they left him. They considered him guilty of the deaths of 2 people he had only wanted to save. And according to his words, he didn't deserve salvation. He had no choice but to wait, as he couldn't fight against a larger number of people. Suddenly, he heard the door to his room open. Immediately, he grabbed a heavy object and prepared to defend himself. But it was a little girl. He was taken aback. He hadn't expected to see her again. When the boy stepped out of the room, he saw that the people guarding him were unconscious. It was Xiao Yun's mother, who wanted to thank him for saving her child. She had given them sleeping pills and wanted the boy to be able to leave. There were also people who were helping him. They planned to leave the city after him as they wanted to live a normal life. They showed him the way that could lead him to the village of stone. And Ze explained that he just wanted to find the one responsible and end the curse that had tormented him for many years and taken his parents. He was ready to do anything, even though he was still a child himself. But when he left, he heard Xiao Yun's voice. She liked him, and the little girl didn't want to part ways. She gave him lanterns she had made from clay. They were supposed to protect him and help him find his way in the dark. With them, he wouldn't get lost and would be able to return alive. She made a wish and wanted him to be happy. After that, a black thread appeared around her neck, tying her to the spirit, but the boy cut it. People saw him off and wished him a safe journey. He was scared, but he didn't want to stop. He felt much better, as he had finally found the way to the village. But with each step, he grew more and more anxious. Yet, he kept walking. After a while, he saw a tree, the same tree that was in his father's photograph. But when he tried to take a picture of it, he realized the camera was acting very strangely. It was recognizing too many faces. And then, with trembling hands, he dared to take that step. Feeling someone's presence behind him, he decided to check it out. And he saw that besides his face, the camera recognized many others. He was already in the settlement, the symbol of which was that very tree. After a while, his phone broke. Suddenly, behind him, he saw an unknown man approaching him. It was a tourist who was curious about how the main character managed to find the settlement. But he didn't inspire much trust in Ze. The main character lied, saying he had gotten lost and stumbled upon the settlement by accident. As it turned out, the tourist also couldn't find a way out of that hellish place. The tourist seemed very familiar to the main character, as if he had seen him somewhere before. His name was Su Feng, and he had come to the village to conduct his research. He was trying to find a meteorite, but could he really be trusted? He was also studying the history of national cultures, and the meteorite wasn't his main goal. This eased the hero's mind, and he put away his weapon, realizing that Su Feng posed no threat to him. Moreover, he greeted him and introduced himself. Now, they were walking together, trying to explore the settlement. As it turned out, Su Feng had been unable to find an exit for a whole month. Yet, Ze couldn't shake the feeling that Su Feng was familiar to him. Furthermore, during his time in the village, he had discovered many unusual things. There were numerous local rituals, including sacrifices. But what could that mean? Su Feng was convinced that the people in the village worshipped some god for whom they performed their rituals. However, throughout his time there, he hadn't found a single statue or hint of its existence. Additionally, the villagers seemed to constantly conduct rituals involving animals, which were brutally killed and tortured. He also found many graves and realized that a lot of people had died in the village. He led the main character to a place he considered special. It was where he lived, as it was the only surviving house in the entire village. He tidied up the house but left the ritual tablets untouched. When the hero wanted to throw them away, Su Feng stopped him. He also pointed to a well from which they could drink water. An unpleasant feeling returned to Ze, one that had been haunting him. Still, he couldn't help but ask Su Feng if they had met before. His behavior startled the guy. Suddenly, he managed to see someone on a hill. To get a better look, he grabbed the tourist's binoculars. And then he saw a girl. She was the one he had encountered before in his dreams. He also noticed that she was speaking to him. But what exactly? He couldn't understand. Did she want him to come out? And then he broke down in tears. Because from what she said, all he heard was that neither of them would make it out of stone alive. Those words made him feel sick. Shang had been trying to call him. He even came to his house trying to find him. But it was all in vain. Where could he have gone, and why wasn't he answering? Could something have happened to him? These questions plagued him, refusing to let him rest, as he knew how hard the guy had struggled with the death of his parents. He remembered how, as a child, he always stayed with him and his parents. Back then, Ze was little and everyone thought he had autism, which came with hallucinations. His parents forced him to behave normally and not pay attention to his illness. It was hard for him to adjust, but he did it to avoid hurting the boy. Maybe he shouldn't have let him go and should have intervened from the start. Meanwhile, Su Feng continued to talk about the meteorite that had landed in the settlement hundreds of years ago. After that, the land became haunted. Moreover, there was so much that was incomprehensible in the settlement that even a scientist couldn't explain it. However, the main character noticed certain discrepancies in his words compared to what his father had written. Furthermore, he hadn't found the meteorite during his entire month in the village. He had some food supplies that he wanted to share with the main character. But he declined and began to ask about the woman he had just seen who was calling to him. However, he hadn't encountered anything like that. It seemed she was a monster, as she had horns on her head and her appearance was strange. It felt like she had managed to capture his attention. Su Feng had encountered many different monsters in stone that had tried to kill him. So he no longer paid attention to unusual people or animals as he tried to keep his distance from them. The main character stepped outside to take a look around. He couldn't calm down and tried to remember where he might have seen Su Feng before. Suddenly, he recalled seeing him in a photo. His face looked remarkably similar to his father's face when he was young. Besides his face, he had another strange premonition. Could it really be a coincidence? Just then, he saw a bloody trail on the road ahead. The main character crawled into the bushes trying to figure out where the blood was coming from, and he realized that this blood belonged to the person he then saw before him. It was her, the same stranger who had asked him to come out and talk to her. But the girl didn't respond. He also realized that he had seen her before. In his dreams, she was a doll. In his dream, she was next to a spirit and was helping him. This meant he could learn information about the spirit from her. But as soon as he thought of this, she began to move away. There was no way he could catch up to her that quickly. However, he noticed that there was a lot of blood and the bloody trail didn't end. He started searching and soon found a suspicious pile right in the bushes before him. He was scared, but he wanted to check what it really was. Suddenly, Su Feng appeared and stopped him. His sudden appearance frightened the guy greatly. But Su Feng was just worried about him because he had disappeared and hadn't returned for a long time. And when Su Feng smiled, the hero realized that even his smile felt familiar. It annoyed him deeply. Su Feng noticed this. and the hero remembered what he had been taught, to be polite and smile at others. So he did just that. He apologized for his behavior and smiled at him. And finally, he understood why Su Feng's smile seemed so familiar. Because it wasn't genuine. He was relieved that he could reconcile with him and hadn't lost his trust. Su Feng talked about the unfamiliar girl. As before approaching her, they needed to prepare. So they were planning to head back, not even realizing how close they had become. Suddenly, they encountered a new girl. She knew Su Feng and was glad he had finally returned. She also noticed that Su Feng was not alone and asked who the main character was. The guy began to introduce them, telling her everything he knew about Ze. She was his classmate, Tang Ying. He wanted to rest and continue the conversation the next day. And she forcibly pulled the guy inside the house where they were staying. Suddenly, the girl grabbed his hand. As dusk was approaching, they needed to hide in a safe place. Still, he agreed. He had plenty of his own supplies, so he didn't want to eat their food. He couldn't start searching while Su Feng was with him. The next day, he would have to figure out what to do about it. Besides, he was exhausted, having not slept for over 30 hours and felt terrible. He couldn't trust either Su Feng or the girl who had suddenly appeared. Moreover, in his house, he hadn't noticed any feminine items. Could they be living in a separate house? The fear he felt made it hard for him to concentrate and think everything through. The next day, he told the man that he wanted to go alone to explore the settlement. But the guy didn't respond. It seemed he was just sleeping. And when the main character approached him, he saw his body parts on the ground. He realized that his face had become distorted, and Su Feng was dead. It was another dream, incredibly terrifying, and the main character woke up in a panic. At that moment, he felt someone's presence. And outside the window, he saw ghosts, many of them. So he opened the door. But there was no one outside. Who was it? Could someone be watching him? But who would want that? However, he knew for sure that it wasn't a coincidence and he had to figure everything out. But when he started searching, he found a very suspicious thing under his feet. It reminded him of the substance he had seen on Su Feng's face in the dream. Could it really not have been a dream? It also resembled what he had found in the forest and, in its composition, looked like rubber. So he went to Su Feng's house trying to make sure he was okay. And when he tried to peek through the crack, he saw nothing. Suddenly, he realized that Tang Ying had been behind him the whole time, watching him. She also asked why he had come and what he was doing outside at such a late hour. She wanted him to tell her everything. And then the guy realized that he had seen her before, as her voice, face, and mannerisms were the same. Moreover, she knew that he was troubled by the same monster girl he had encountered the day before. She kept talking and even touched him while the guy remained silent. He couldn't believe what was happening to him and that the people he met were so similar and familiar. It seemed she was trying to seduce him, so he pushed her away. He didn't care who she was, but he knew for sure that she played an important role in his life. He couldn't afford to get distracted, and he tried to manage his own fear and anger, not wanting to show his emotions. So he decided to return to his own house to avoid drawing attention to himself. However, he couldn't calm down. He understood that he needed to act and couldn't just wait. He found a photo on his phone of the same woman that Tang Ying reminded him of. After dawn, he met with the man and explained why he wanted to go alone, and he didn't stop him. He knew that new people could appear on his path who would be monsters. They would try to interfere in every way possible. Under no circumstances should he pay attention to them, because all those people were ones he had known in his life. These faces weren't just familiar, as he quickly forgot them. So, at that moment, he refused the boy who appeared before him. And because of that, the little one got angry with him. Suddenly, from the well in the settlement from which they drank water, an incomprehensible thing began to emerge. It seemed to be some kind of monster that lived there. Soon, this ghost surfaced and began moving toward the main character. The guy was about to turn back, but he realized that it could be even more dangerous in the village than outside of it. He pulled out a knife, knowing that danger was approaching. Just then, he heard strange footsteps behind him. Turning around, he saw what he feared the most. There was Su Feng, right next to a girl. They were furious that the guy had figured everything out. Their faces were strange, covered in some incomprehensible substance. Suddenly, they began to transform into a monster. He understood everything. He realized that all this time he had been seeing a ghost that was trying to gain his trust. And right now it was trying to attack him. Suddenly, a terrifying monster appeared before him, ready to strike. He started running away from it. And the little boy who had asked for his help wasn't real either. The main character tried to escape. However, he didn't know where to run. Could he really have spent so much time with Sufeng? With a monster? He understood that the ghosts appeared to him only in the forms of familiar people. And it seemed this could trigger hallucinations, making him mistake them for ordinary people. Then he remembered his father's words, that there were no living people in the settlement and everyone he met would try to deceive him and take over his mind. Could it be that Han Chang was wrong and had actually encountered a ghost while wandering the outskirts of Stone Village? But then he wouldn't have been able to return and escape the village alive. So there had to be another reason. But was it all really because of him? Suddenly, he stopped at the edge of a high mountain. He had nowhere else to run. He was trapped. Below, he saw the same settlement and realized that all roads led back to it. There was no way out. Just then, he noticed the monster was getting closer. It was right there, about to attack the main character. Suddenly, a strike that Ze managed to dodge. It tried to wound him, swinging its own knife. But it was all in vain as he couldn't pierce its thick skin. His knife just bounced off and the monster dealt him a heavy blow. He flew back several meters and stopped against the trunk of the nearest tree. He hit hard, but there was no time to waste. The creature was closing in on him again. It began to attack him. The boy wanted to try to dodge its strike. The creature had developed armor, and he was trying to find its weak spots. One of those might have been its face. But when he saw that it looked familiar, he hesitated to strike. That voice made him stop. He realized he was powerless. Was this really the end for him? In that moment, he remembered who that little boy he had just seen was. He was his school enemy, who had constantly bullied him, and everything had stopped at the moment when Ze decided to fight back and managed to defend himself. So, this inspired him. He realized he couldn't just give up and he started to fight back. Blow after blow, he began to attack the monster with his knife, inflicting serious wounds. Moreover, his hand transformed into that of the monster and he could also tear at its body with sharp claws. But that wasn't all. For in the dark forest, he spotted another creature, a terrifying spider that was also preparing to attack him. As he got distracted, the monster he was fighting managed to strike back. It tried to throw him off the mountain, but Ze managed to stay on his feet. He dislocated his arm. It hurt like hell, but he couldn't stop. He saw the monster charging at him. Besides, the creature could regenerate and it wouldn't be easy to kill it. He needed something else, something much more effective. Then he noticed the flowers below. At first glance, they seemed ordinary, but he knew exactly what they could hide. From his dreams, he knew they were killer flowers just waiting for someone to touch them. And he realized he had to do everything possible to push the monster down. He waited as the monster approached him. The main character tried to wait for the moment when he could shove it down. And when that moment came, he sprang into action. Ze managed to dodge the first strike. Next, he grabbed it by the arm. The boy exerted incredible effort to do this, and he succeeded. But the monster managed to hold on. The boy was also clinging to it, risking falling down and being torn apart by the hungry flowers. The creature managed to grab the edge of the mountain. And together with the main character, they hung over the abyss. The boy tried to climb up, continuing to scramble. But the monster was grabbing at him, not letting him do it. Still, he understood he had no choice and braced himself for the fall. Suddenly, what he feared the most happened. Another creature appeared above them, one that had been lurking in the forest, waiting for the right moment to attack. Moreover, it was very dangerous, armed with deadly weapons. Also, the spider was hungry and it was best not to get too close. Still, the only chance to survive was to try to climb the mountain. For if he fell, he would die, but he could try to defeat the spider. So he began to climb for salvation. But the creature bit him, preventing him from doing so. He started to slash at it with his own knife. But he lost his grip and began to fall. It seemed like the end. Suddenly, the same girl appeared and managed to catch him, saving him from the fall. He landed on the side where the deadly flowers couldn't reach him. It hurt, but he was glad to be alive. The hero was sure this was the worst thing that had ever happened in his life. Moreover, he saw the monster and the spider fall off the cliff with him. And, as he suspected, the deadly flowers began to tear them apart, trying to share the spoils. He felt joy watching this. He had managed to win. The monsters became real food for the flowers. It was a shame they couldn't make any sounds, as it was clear how much they were suffering and how desperately they tried to escape. It was a pleasure to watch, and he saw them being ripped into tiny pieces. However, he couldn't move when he saw his savior before him. He hoped there would be no more creatures like that on his path that he would have to fight. Moreover, he managed to remember something he had forgotten. When he was little, his parents tried to treat him and took him to the best doctor in their town. Back then, he just wanted to learn to smile as he saw how hard it was for his parents to look at him. The doctor, who resembled Tang Ying, asked them very uncomfortable questions. She thought the main character might not be the biological son of his parents. Furthermore, she was curious about what kind of child he was and if he had ever run away from home. And as it turned out, that did happen sometimes, but each time he was caught and couldn't run far, so he was never left alone again. The doctor felt he didn't perceive the world like an ordinary person, he just couldn't do that. He believed his home was in another place, and his parents were preventing him from escaping, making him suffer, which could only get worse. The child never felt truly happy and he had no curiosity about the world around him. He had no friends, his condition was very dangerous for both himself and the people around him. When they returned home, the boy behaved as usual. He was very serious and rarely spoke. His mother was most worried about him. More than anything in the world, she wanted him to be happy. However, she understood she couldn't change anything. She apologized to him for not being able to give him what he wanted. She felt sorry for her child for suffering all the time, and they, along with his father, didn't even pay much attention to it. And to make him happy, she was ready to go to Stone Village, as she knew that was the place he considered home. But the boy didn't respond. He knew that because of this, his parents might die. However, his mother was ready to leave that very day, as there might still be people there. She was truly prepared to take that step. After a while, she began to pack things, and her husband didn't understand what was really happening, as he knew they couldn't return to the village. The people who were there were dangerous and could harm them, but the woman couldn't calmly watch what was happening to their son. She was ready to do anything for him, even take such a desperate step. And the boy was a witness to their arguments and heard everything. He cried, understanding that all this was happening because of him. So he started to run away again. His father constantly kept an eye on him. His only friend was little Sheng, who played with him when he asked. And the main character begged him for help. He pleaded with tears in his eyes. At that moment, he realized that Sheng was indeed not a bad teacher, as he was happy and felt better with him. But he decided to get up and keep moving forward. At that moment, it was particularly hard for him, and he didn't feel well. But he promised himself to smile even in such a difficult situation for the sake of his parents, who did everything they could for him. Suddenly, he saw his own bag that he couldn't find. An unfamiliar girl returned it to him. He thought she was a monster and had also appeared to kill him. However, she kept repeating for him to come back. The boy didn't believe her and thought she was just another shadow trying to deceive him. Also, the doll around her neck. It was trying to find its owner. But he didn't want to listen to her and planned to keep moving. She stopped him. Moreover, he thanked her for saving him. He owed her. He was also ready to kill her if she got in his way. Her anger flared at his words, and she struck him. But he felt he was very close to unraveling the mystery. Finally, he managed to piece together the puzzle in his mind and get closer to the truth. Soon it should all come to an end. The girl looked at him and seemed to want to say something. Suddenly she ran, pulling him along, but what did she really want from him? Did she want to lead him into a trap? Also, she wasn't human. She didn't want to answer his questions as it seemed she was embarrassed about it. Ze realized that his question had upset her. Meanwhile, they arrived at a house that was almost in ruins. Upon entering, it became clear that it wasn't abandoned, as someone lived there. Despite the mess inside, an old man sat there. His home was very old, but he was the only living person in stone. The old man didn't understand whom Xiao Guai had brought him, so he was very surprised to see the first visitor in many years. In turn, the main character also didn't expect to meet a living person and was shocked. He felt uncomfortable in the old man's home. There was a terrible stench and chaos. Xiao Guai tried to explain to the old man who the main character was. She told him that she had saved him from the monsters. As it turned out, the man was exactly who the hero had been searching for because he had seen God with his own eyes. This filled him with hope, as he believed the man might know where he was. The old man couldn't believe that the boy had managed to break through the barrier and still found the settlement. Finding God wasn't easy. It required risking one's life and overcoming a tremendous number of trials. Many people had tried to do it, but no one succeeded. He had witnessed them die and lose their minds. And he began to tell his own story how it all started. He was several hundred years old and had spent his entire life in stone. He was the only one who survived among the entire population. His parents and friends had been killed. He didn't want to rush and told everything in order. It all began when a massive meteorite landed on Earth, and everyone in the settlement believed it was a sacred stone. The meteorite was enormous, and everyone who witnessed its fall thought it was God himself. They immediately rushed to the crash site and saw the stone before them. Moreover, the stone had destroyed the nearest water reservoir and the landowner's house. But why did this happen to them? So, the population took it as a bad omen and divine punishment for their sins. However, one man, a local craftsman, became intrigued by the stone. He began to work on it for a long time and with great care. As a result, he created a gigantic and beautiful sculpture which became a happy talisman for the settlement. Because of this, people began to believe in the legend of the happy stone and thought that the spirit residing in the sculpture would protect them from evil. Additionally, the craftsman was one of the monks, and when he heard about the fall of the sacred meteorite, he came to the settlement and wanted to take it with him. After his creation was complete, he began performing bloody sacrifices and other dark rituals around it. At first, the population was against this and tried to resist, but over time they began to get used to it and participated in the rituals themselves. Everyone agreed to this except for the family of the landowner, who suffered more than anyone else. After all, his only son had died because of the meteorite's fall, and they simply couldn't believe that the stone was a harbinger of good and a protector. Then the monk assured them that after all his rituals there was a chance to resurrect their dead son, after which they also agreed. Suddenly, the main character had a vision of an unknown figure covered in a red cloak. He had seen it many times before, and each time it repeated. But this time, the pain was unbearable and his head hurt intensely. Strangely, he had never paid much attention to it, but now he realized it might mean something. The man noticed that he was feeling unwell and wanted to help him. But the boy calmed him down, and he continued. After the bloody ritual, everyone was very happy, believing they could now live in abundance. But in reality, it was quite the opposite. Everyone began to make wishes, believing they would come true. The old man did the same. At that moment, he managed to hear the statue speak to him, and its voice didn't frighten him. On the contrary, it managed to soothe him. At that moment, he felt that his wish would surely come true, and he wished for his mother to recover. When he returned home, his mother suddenly felt better and was doing very well. But by the time he realized everything, it was too late because all the inhabitants of the settlement were dead. He was left alone and saw monsters tearing apart the dead bodies of his acquaintances and friends. Only he and his mother remained alive and were the only inhabitants of the settlement until then. The main character approached the bed where his mother lay. She was covered with a blanket, and he could only see her hand, so he wanted to take a look. But the old man advised him not to uncover her as he wouldn't like what he might see there. He felt that he hadn't aged and could only move because when he promised to take care of her forever, that was his curse. However, his mother, unlike him, aged like ordinary people, and her life force was quickly leaving her body. It was hard to imagine what her body looked like as several hundred years had passed, yet she remained alive and her heart continued to beat. Sometimes the old man couldn't even recognize her and simply didn't believe that it was his mother. She no longer resembled a human, she was a living corpse. More than anything in the world, he wanted to die as he was extremely tired after so many years of such a life. After all, eternity had become a true curse for him and he couldn't become free. At first, God wasn't like this. He was merciful to him, but then everything changed. But the main character realized that the man could be lying to him or not telling the whole truth. Because how could he perform the ritual of bloody sacrifice? His words frightened the man, as he was just a child back then and understood nothing at all. This made the main character laugh. He tried to figure out where the temple of the ancestors might be and how he could get there. Suddenly, the old man with a knife lunged at him just as the boy turned his back and didn't see him. Xiao Guai, who had witnessed what was happening, couldn't allow this and tried again to save the main character. She attempted to knock the knife out of his hands. And when the man was ready to strike, he saw a vision where another man stood in the place of the main character. Because of this, he stopped as those were his memories and they were very painful for him. At that moment, Xiao Guai took advantage of this and threw her own doll at him. She succeeded as his weapon was broken. He fell to the ground before the boy. It was the end. The man begged to be killed, along with his mother. But why did he take such a desperate step? Did he really want to make a wish and die? The man kept pleading with the main character to kill him as only he could do it. And finally, he would be free. But even this time his words sounded very strange. He was lying again and knew much more than he said. However, the old man acknowledged his own mistakes and continued to insist on his point. He fell to his knees and begged to finally be freed from the suffering he had endured for many, many years. But the boy remained silent. He took his staff, and with all his might he swung it over the old man's head. Was this really going to happen? The old man froze and awaited his release. He was grateful. The strike. But the boy didn't kill him. He was trying to find out where the temple of the ancestors was and wanted the man to tell him about it. He wanted to sort out everything that had happened, after which he promised to return and free him. But just as he was about to leave, Xiao Guai stopped him. She knew where the temple was, so she went with him to show him the way. But first, she gave him a chance to choose and pointed to an old, crumbling house. But it was a storage of various things, among which the hero could choose what he liked most. All those things belonged to people, and she collected them because she wanted to become human. Immediately, a shiny object caught his attention. It was a gift for a loved one, which belonged to someone else. He realized that terrible things had always happened in the village, and everyone who came here stayed forever. He thanked Xiao Guai for her kindness towards him and for saving his life twice. After which, he was ready to move on. It got dark outside and he was almost at his destination, but he didn't see any temple before him. In fact, it was underground. And shining his flashlight on the path ahead, he saw a deep pit. That was exactly the place he had been searching for. And Ze went. He began to descend the stairs and marveled at how deep it was. The girl tried not to lose sight of him. But he quickly disappeared. And in the darkness, she couldn't see anything at all. Moreover, there was something else. She couldn't enter because of the monsters that wouldn't let beings like her in. Only humans had the right to enter. And the boy was left alone, face to face with all the horrors that lay ahead of him. Through the complete darkness, he couldn't see what was below. The stairs he continued to descend were covered in blood. Someone had tried to get inside before, but they hadn't succeeded. Suddenly, he saw the body of a man. He was smiling. It was the same unknown man with the severed arm whom he had tried to save in the city. And when he tried to turn back, he noticed that there was a wall behind him. Now he couldn't turn back and was forced to move only forward. He remembered that it could all be just hallucinations and tried to calm himself. But then he saw another ghost hovering right in front of him in the air, after which it lunged at him. It was the skeleton of a rooster from his terrifying vision. The main character was terrified. He fell to the ground and lost his flashlight, which was his only source of light. He froze and held his breath, and the ghost stopped as it could no longer see him. To distract it, he tried to pull something out of his bag, and he threw it down the stairs. This created a noise, and the ghost reacted. It worked. When the path was clear, he found his flashlight and could move on. However, the flashlight malfunctioned and was broken. He walked almost blindly and couldn't see anything in front of him. Step by step, he descended deeper and deeper and didn't understand how deep he could be. Suddenly, the ground beneath his feet vanished. He lost his balance as he found himself at the edge of an abyss. He couldn't scream, but as he fell, he managed to grab onto a sharp ledge. This saved his life. Suddenly, he saw a very strange sight below. Everything was glowing with bright light. The boy was overjoyed, as it was exactly the place he had been searching for. It was a palace. Slowly, he began to descend. He felt no fear at all and calmly started moving toward the mystical house. But the closer he got, the stronger his hallucinations became. He tried to resist and attempted to open the doors. They wouldn't budge. It wasn't easy, but he managed. Upon entering, he saw scattered puzzle pieces underfoot. Was this a dream again? Suddenly, what he saw made him stop. In the bright room, there were a huge number of puzzles and a ghost trying to assemble them. It seemed he had been waiting for him. In fact, he was even happy to see that the main character had found the palace and come to him. He stood before the boy in full height. It was the ghost who had sent him the puzzles. He was the one who killed his parents. Suddenly, the apparition began to transform. It even started to develop a face. And after a while, in his place stood a man with light hair in white clothing. But why was the main character seeing him? Very soon, he would remember everything and understand. And he began to see visions from the very day the meteorite fell on the settlement. He saw a woman who had witnessed what was happening. The girl, named Qing, was his sister. and when he heard a noise outside the window, he went out to see what was really happening. But he was sick. At that moment, the sun was particularly hot, and she wanted him to return to the room. Things were bad as the landowner's son had died due to the fall and the water reservoir had been destroyed. Hearing this, the boy began to pray. He prayed for him. The boy who died had tormented him and kept him under the blazing sun for 2 hours, after which his entire body was covered in burns and rashes. Suddenly, an unknown man appeared before him. He stared at him for a long time as the young man was an albino. The girl stood up to defend him. What did the unknown want? Seeing her, he merely smiled, after which he simply vanished. The next evening, the boy felt unwell. His sister took care of him and wanted him to listen to her and not go outside when the sun was shining. He also knew that people had begun to make a statue from the piece of meteorite that had landed on Earth. Soon, they were supposed to finish it. It seemed he also believed that the statue and the temple the people were building had magical power. He also prepared a gift for his sister, something he made with his own hands. It was a doll. When suddenly, there was a knock at the door. It was the village head. He promised to buy medicine for him, and she was overjoyed when he arrived. However, it was nothing like that. The boy heard strange noises and, despite feeling very weak, stepped out of the room to see what was happening. The furniture was smashed and the room was in complete disarray. He realized that what he feared was happening. He heard his sister's screams. She was arguing with the village head, Stone. And then he saw an unknown man. Could it be him, the head of their village? He was trying to convince the girl to hand over her sick brother. They wanted to sacrifice him. Most of the villagers supported this idea and everyone was watching what was happening. The monk didn't expect Qing to agree, so he planned to do it by force. The girl didn't understand what was happening with the village head. She was terrified when she saw him. But it wasn't just him who decided this. His idea was backed by all the other villagers, and he was ready to do what he had planned, even against her will. The boy was so weak that he could no longer stand. He began to drift off and couldn't control himself. He was having terrible nightmares. Suddenly, he found himself in some unknown place he had never been before. When he woke up, he saw the village head right in front of him. He was holding a knife, and the sacrifice of the albino began. The boy tried to scream for help, but it was in vain. The man continued to kill him, reciting a prayer. After a while, he no longer felt pain, but he couldn't move. It seemed he was trapped somewhere, or placed in an unknown location. Why wasn't anyone saving him? He heard voices of people who came to the statue and made wishes. None of them heard his pleas for help. They were all praying. Had he really died? A man in white clothing showed his memories to the main character, wanting Ze to remember and understand him. He was sealed in a stone statue and slowly began to rot, unable to escape. He lost his life. He was brutally killed. His heartbeat stopped and he felt nothing, but he could hear sounds from outside. People came to the statue every day. He remembered how often he was forced to stay in the sun. The cruel people did this just because he was different from the others. But none of the locals ever helped him. Only after some time did he realize how disgusting people could be. Suddenly, a little boy came to him. More than anything in the world, he wanted his mother to get better, and he really wanted the statue to help him. Then, for the first time, he spoke, and the boy heard his voice. He began to talk to the people and wanted to know where his sister was. He wanted to see her. But he quickly realized that it was impossible. No one had ever helped him with his sister. They were orphans. He saw the events of that evening and understood that it was the village head who killed his sister in exchange for the life of his own brother. But he lied, as he did something even worse to him. He killed the girl to resurrect the landowner's son. Her brother tried to dissuade her. But she went anyway, and it was too late. She was moving away from her home and feared she would never be able to return. Suddenly, she saw a bright light ahead and didn't understand what it could mean. At that moment, as she walked away, the evil men, who were the head's servants, kidnapped her brother. And when she realized what had happened, she wanted to run away, but they wouldn't let her go. She cried, but the people wouldn't release her. They were convinced that this was the best time to carry out their wicked plans. So they treated her very cruelly. They sacrificed her. Moreover, she was killed in a sacred place. Under the tree, anyone could make a wish and believed it would surely come true, so she made her last wish as well. She wanted all the people in the village to die. And then her brother heard her, and he was ready to fulfill her wish. Meanwhile, in the landowner's house, the light was on. His parents, who were the masterminds behind the ritual and ordered the girl to be sacrificed, hoped it would bring their son back. Suddenly, they heard some unknown sound. The man couldn't figure out what it could be for a long time. But the woman immediately understood everything and became very anxious. She saw a shadow behind her husband. They were not alone. It was their son who had come back to life. He was hungry. His body was distorted. Entering their room, he began to eat. They didn't escape. And when the village head saw what had happened, he nearly fainted, because someone was inside him. When the son had his fill of his own parents, he moved on. He only glanced in horror at their bloodied bodies, and left only trails of blood behind. Many monsters appeared in the village, causing panic. People couldn't believe what was happening, as just yesterday they lived peacefully. At that very moment, the ancestral temple, which was located outside the village, found itself in the center of the village. Moreover, the village began to sink into the ground. Was this the apocalypse? His sister was able to be reborn. But she was not an ordinary person. She had a different body. Qing received a new appearance but remembered the events of her past life. The girl lay on the ground and couldn't get up. And when she finally managed to, she saw the ruined village with rivers of blood. She had a toy with her, a gift from her dead brother. A lonely ghost wandered through the city whose parents had perished. She understood that she had to find at least one living person. It was all her brother's fault, who had become a god and granted people's wishes. After a while, the village without people began to crumble. This place turned into a wasteland. In stone, monster plants began to grow. The once thriving village was unrecognizable. Moreover, he was preparing an embryo for himself. He was to become his descendant in the world of humans. He was to be his gift. However, he chose them very carefully. Because those who didn't fit him, he simply destroyed. Everything had to be perfect. Due to his secret, the village constantly attracted new tourists. They tried to unravel the mysterious secret of the settlement and find out what really happened. Moreover, people also made wishes, not even suspecting where it would lead. One such wish was to have a child. And then the time for the embryo, which God had prepared for so long, arrived. He was his descendant. This would be the main character, Ze. It seemed he was just an ordinary boy. But in reality, he was anything but. He had always been in another place and wanted to return to his true home and father. He managed to survive only by means of his human body and blood. The main character listened to the man but couldn't believe his eyes. Because it was him. He was the one who killed his parents. The albino didn't even deny his guilt in their deaths. He only thought that Ze shouldn't worry, as he was actually his son. Ze was furious because he was a liar. He deceived him and his parents. And the sorrow of others made him happy. But it was his parents' own choice. They agreed to pay such a high price to have a descendant. After all, at first he saved his father, who was nearly killed by a monster. He also said that he and his friends were supposed to die in the village cursed. Then his father believed it. Because he thought that God actually existed, and that was when he was speaking to him. He could live a little longer only if he made other people make wishes. He also had to wish for God to give him a child with his beloved. And his father knew about the consequences of these wishes and that all people were doomed. Yet the man agreed. He simply had no choice, as he wanted to live a little longer rather than die that very day. It was very hard for him, but he managed to return to the settlement. He wanted to live. Even though his friends would also die. He chose life. But the boy didn't believe him. In his father's diary, he read something completely different. But he didn't even think about who could have told about his mother's wish if it wasn't his father. Because then she began to search for him. And found his notebook. But where had he gone? And then she saw the most horrifying thing in her life. There were many corpses in the village, which were her friends. She started running to try to save others and escape the mystical village. Hiding in one of the houses, she tried to calm down. She read the notebook. Making a person believe in God was very simple. You just had to make her wish, and she wished to bring back her dead husband. After which, his father returned. He was quite a clever man, as he made her believe. From the very beginning, he lied and was in cahoots with God. He knew about the puzzles and knew what could happen next. And he was the one who lured the main character into a trap and made him come to the abandoned village. All of this was planned. The boy realized what kind of trouble he was in. He would never be able to go back and would sit in the dungeon next to his real father for the rest of his days. And then, he remembered his father's words, who loved studying astronomy more than anything else on earth and often gazed at the night sky. After all, there was always light above their heads. The main character had to see it and remember everything. And then, he decided to give it a shot. He lunged at the god and tried to strike him. This could be the last fight of his life. And he was ready to fight to the bitter end. For his parents. For all the pain he had endured. The man was taken aback by his bravery. He knew the kid didn't stand a chance as he lacked the strength to kill him. He tried to hit him where it hurt, talking about his parents and how he had treated them. Suddenly, their bodies appeared before him. They obeyed the god and were ready to do whatever he commanded. Right then, the boy had to resist, as the shadows ordered him to stop and give up. But he wouldn't listen to them. He had only one desire. He wanted to kill the god of the underworld even at the cost of his own life. Then he managed to understand why his parents had died and why the god had treated them so cruelly. After all, he was jealous. It was clear that the boy was just like him. After all, he was his son, and his parents had managed to save him and didn't let him take him away too. Meanwhile, strange things were happening on the surface. Shen was watching all of this. She realized the boy needed help and decided to take a desperate step. And she jumped into the hole, not knowing what awaited her ahead. The hero truly managed to remember everything. He recalled the moment the man was sealed in stone, forced to sit there for the rest of his life. And then he understood that the only way to win was through light. After all, that was what the god had feared when he was human. He realized that only this could save him. The only place he could break through was a crack in the statue through which a little light and air passed. But the boy had no way to reach it, and the god believed the boy would lose this battle. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a bow appeared in his hands. He tried to aim, but the man understood everything and tried to stop him. He was ready to take that step to save his own life and was willing to kill him. That was how one could make a bloody wish. But at that moment, the boy saw his arrow almost reach its target. But he was whole and unharmed. In fact, it was Shen who got hurt, having pushed him away at the last moment. But she was overjoyed, as she had finally found her brother, and he, seeing her, couldn't believe his eyes. However, she was on the side of the main character, and she wanted to help him. She started pulling out the arrow so that the light the god feared would shine on him. But it seemed he didn't understand who Shen really was, and he began trying to kill her to stop her. Suddenly, a ghost appeared from her toy. It was his spirit from the time he was human. He began to protect the girl, not letting her get hit. But the fact that the god had forgotten his own sister wasn't her fault. She had made a wish, and now she knew the true reason he had become this way. After all, he had once given her his last protection, which was a doll. She was exhausted. Her strength was leaving her body. Then, the god began to understand who she really was. He even remembered her name. But she wanted to die for real and wanted to take him with her. At that moment, the main character began to panic. After all, he too managed to remember something. He realized that the god was very lonely, which was why he wanted to create a son for himself. And it was he who could kill him, as he had a power that no one else had. Then Shen fell to the ground. It was all over. The boy couldn't believe that the god had killed his own sister. He couldn't forgive him for that, as he was killing innocent people and instilling hope in them. Then he released a massive number of arrows. Soon it would all come to an end. After all, the ceiling began to crumble. Sunlight started breaking into the dungeon, illuminating the god and the main character. Shen had always wanted to be human and live her life alongside her brother. It was at that moment that the man finally understood who she was. He began to regret his actions, but he also started to die. He loved the sun and the light, but from the very beginning it had become his greatest enemy. Puzzles, that was his game. He wasn't going to kill the main character, as he had one and had a human soul and body. And then he threw him out of the dungeon, which was starting to collapse with rocks. And he, along with his sister, found himself in darkness, with no hope of salvation. Those were the last moments they could be together. Then there was complete darkness. After his death, all the monsters in the village began to die. The evil spirits left the settlement, and the carnivorous plants turned into ordinary flowers and trees. It was all over, and the main character remained whole and unharmed. He lay on the ground. Suddenly, a phone rang. It jolted him back to reality. Finally, he was able to talk to his friend, who had been trying to reach him all this time. Ze finally found a way out of the village. He was heading home, but felt very sad. However, he managed to carry out his plan and got his revenge. He saved himself and was able to lift the curse that had tormented him for many years, preventing him from sleeping peacefully. Shen was overjoyed when he saw him. The hero smiled. For the first time in a long while, he felt happy. He loved this world and the people who were around him. That was how Shang was, always supporting and helping him. He was his only true friend. When it was all over, they embraced. Finally, he was able to exhale in relief.